Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for attending Skyla's webinar today for AI in physical security. We're going to be speaking about the challenges, solutions, and the future. And today in our webinar, we have a couple of distinguished gentlemen. We have Jim McJunkin and Armen Kherlopian. So Jim is a very experienced law enforcement and government affairs advisor at Skyla. So Jim, maybe you welcome.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me.
And we also are joined by Armen Kherlopian, who is an expert in AI and technology advisor at Skyla, and also on the scientific advisory board for member for a NASA-backed TRISH. Hello, Armen, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Chris. Pleasure to be here. Hello there, Jim.
Well, guys, I guess we're here today to talk about AI and how what Skyla is. Just to tell everybody that's joining our webinar today, Skyla is we're a software company, and we develop AI-powered video analytics for real-time threat detection. So we are monitoring existing video cameras, accessing those streams in real time, and we're watching for objects, actions, and behavior anomalies as it pertains to threats. So this gives us the ability to identify in real time things like guns, knives, fights, intruders, bags left behind, active shooters, active shooter tracking, face slip and falls, facial ID, facial recognition. There's a lot of capabilities that we've specifically trained our AI around. And Armen is one of the world's leading experts in AI. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, Armen?
Absolutely, Chris. So a few things here to keep in mind when we're speaking about artificial intelligence. Indeed, we're speaking about a family of technologies, and many of which relate to analogs of how people see, hear, read. And Skyla, of course, is involved in vision, in particular, a sub-area called computer vision, which involves finding, extracting, and assessing patterns in images and video streams. So quite foundational for physical security.
Thank you. And Jim, so that gives us a quick understanding of AI. And Jim is an expert in law enforcement and actually putting this technology to work. So Jim, can you give us maybe some comments on how you think AI can be used in today's world?
Yeah, I think that for me, I've never been a big product guy, and I think that my career progression as it developed through the last, say, 30 or 40 years, when I finally got introduced to Skyla, a light bulb went on for me. So just to give you a little bit of background, I spent 30 years in state and federal law enforcement, over 25 years with the FBI, and post 9/11, I played a very significant role in transforming the FBI's counterterrorism approach from one that was largely reactive and sort of suspect-based, investigative focused, to one where we were required to introduce intelligence to what we did in an attempt to be proactive. So taking clues and intelligence leads and trying to determine whether or not we had someone that was about to do something was sort of the focus of what we did. Now, that was a very complicated process at the FBI, and it was a large scale event. But when I retired from the FBI in 2012 and entered the private sector, I took those lessons and I applied them to corporate security, first at Discover Financial and then again at the Chicago Cubs, and now again in what I'm doing now in a consultant, in the consultant sort of approach, is to figure out how do I take a system of security, which is designed in a physical security sort of traditional way, which you have personnel that are trained to be security officers. You have some level of investigative capacity. You have tool sets, which includes in most corporations a large reliance on CCTV cameras and CCTV footage. And then how do I turn that sort of traditional approach into a forward-leaning, proactive approach. And it's more than just tools. It has to do with training your personnel properly. It has all to do about the process involved and what they do with things that they observe, and whether and how thoroughly they investigate it, and whether or not they can put the pieces together to determine whether there's something afoot that hasn't happened yet. So that gives you a window of time to mitigate the risk that comes with the suspicious activity. And then when you get to the tool sets, CCTV, both at Discover and at the Cubs, we had literally thousands of camera views that were available to us, but they were largely limited to a reactive sort of historical investigation capacity, because something would happen, you would go search out a camera view and you would determine whether or not you had video footage of the incident. And that was turned over to police, or turned over to the FBI, or to some other organization that was interested in the investigation. And that was the value of your CCTV. So what we were trying to do at the Cubs, primarily because that's where I was introduced to the Skyla concept, we were trying to figure out, how do we take the clues of things that are occurring, and how do we identify things that aren't being watched live on the Joint Operations Control screen by a handful of security officers at any time, day or night, and try to bring their attention to something that they needed to see that was important. And traditional CCTV approach is a very difficult thing to do, because you might have 10 or 15 or 20 screens on the wall where you've got individual camera views, but you're not seeing the other 10,000 possible camera views, and there's nothing that's actually bringing your attention, the security officer's attention to it, until an incident occurs. So the idea of introducing Skyla primarily to the Cubs, which was my experience in recent history, was to figure out a way to bring the attention of the security officer to an incident, so that we had more time to react to it and attempt to mitigate the incident as quickly as we possibly can, to reduce the likelihood that somebody would get hurt or worse, or that significant property damage would occur. And that's when I sort of fell in love with the Skyla product. And so that's why I'm here, and that's sort of show you sort of how I use Skyla to sort of transition from a reactive approach using CCTV cameras to a proactive approach. And then the beauty of this was that I didn't have to reinvest in all of the hardware that I already invested in as an organization. I was able to use the CCTV camera systems that we had, and the software programs that were designed to manage that CCTV data, and brought it to an entirely new level. So that's why I'm here, and why I took a significant interest in Skyla after I left the Cubs.
So Armen, would you agree that the term AI, artificial intelligence, has been thrown around really loose over the last few years about what actually is or isn't? For example, like people saying that the analytics that are embedded in a camera, they call that artificial intelligence. Is that true AI, or is that just like a rules-based analytic?
Yeah, we can absolutely disambiguate some of these terms. And so if we consider artificial intelligence in terms of a way to have assistance in taking action, machine learning below that is a way to find patterns in data, and then computer vision, natural language processing, graph analytics, working with specific types of data. This can unlock significant capability. So what Skyla is using with AI, with machine learning, with computer vision, specifically methods involving neural networks. So this is very similar to the advanced technologies that make it possible for cars to drive themselves. And so what the Skyla team has achieved in terms of computational efficiency, in terms of, Kris, your specific question, in terms of the workload required and the challenges of putting that in a camera, versus what Skyla is able to do with cloud, including edge computing, we have a resultant capability that's quite profound. And as Jim highlighted, this is enabling us to shift from being reactive to proactive. And specifically, a security guard or in different industry domains, whether that's in finance and healthcare, you have AI in advanced instances providing a form of algorithmic assist. The machine, the software, the technologies prompts the user, the expert human user, hey, look at this right now. And we have many examples of this in our day-to-day life. You can consider, even the rudimentary spam filters in our email is helpful. Would you imagine going back to a world where you didn't even have your email sorted by some priority or spam? Here, with increasingly advanced technology, increasingly heavy amounts of data, we have analogous capability and physical security. So, Jim, I'd like to ask a follow-on question. You mentioned, in terms of the training of the staff. So with this algorithmic assist, these alerts that are being done in a proactive way, with your experience in security, how does that change the model? How does that enable the teams?
Well, I'll give you a really clear example. We had at the Chicago Cubs last summer, there was a lot of activity in the city. It was a lot of unusual activity because of the times, and what we were looking for is how did that affect the Chicago Cubs and Wrigley Field specifically. So in one event, we were able to detect an individual who had disembarked from the train, which is less than a block away from Wrigley Field, and they walked around the stadium, made a lap around the stadium. And at some point in time, they reached up with a spray can, an aerosol spray paint can, and they marked one of the gates. They put a mark above the gate, and then they walked off and got on the train and left the area. So we didn't have any idea of who that person was or why they were marking that location. But what we were able to then do is, through training and identifying that something that had happened, rather than just painting over the mark and moving on, we started to unravel that a little bit to try to determine, had we seen that person before? So has that person ever been present at the stadium as a guest? Has that person ever been in the stadium as a vendor? Has that person ever been in the stadium in any other capacity as a visitor? That we could then go back and try to identify who that person was from historical record. Skyla was a very important tool in our ability to do that. And then moving forward, the idea of what that mark was placed there for, we were able to determine from the identity of that person and working with the local police department that person was actually putting a mark on the stadium as a rally point for other people who were being communicated with through social media, and without them knowing exactly who was coming or who they were, because the anonymity or the anonymity of it all was perfect for their environment. Without that mark on the stadium gate, they had no central place to find to congregate. So we were able to sort of eliminate a problem for our stadium. We didn't exactly know what they were going to do when they arrived, but the intersection between training, awareness, and then the use of the tool sets, which I mentioned that Skyla became a very important part of that, centrally allowed us to sort of break that thing down and mitigate it before it was ever an issue. So by painting over the mark immediately, rather than waiting, which would have probably been whenever facilities got to it, we were able to prioritize that action and paint over that mark, and then look for that person again, either in prior video footage and look for that person in future video footage. So when that person showed up again at the stadium in whatever capacity, we were able to immediately focus on that image and then follow that person around and determine what they were up to while they were there. So it turned out to be sort of the cornerstone for a very important process that took training. It took some discipline from the security personnel, and it also allowed us to sort of break these otherwise insignificant incidents down into how they could have developed into something much more serious, and we were able to sort of eliminate and mitigate the risk that came from that.
So you guys, by just analyzing and watching for abnormal human behavior, that one person that's acting different than every other fan, every other person on the street, you identified that action or the things that that X, and by cleaning that up, you were helped to help mitigate a future threat that probably never happened because you guys were proactive about that and stopped it before it happened. Is that
That's
fair
exactly
statement?
right. Exactly right. And there were other examples of that too. We had a woman and a man who were, dressed in somewhat business type activity, and they were taking photographs of one of the gates in a non-event scenario, just a normal day in the middle of the day. There was no concert or game going on. And you normally you would say, well, that's just somebody taking a picture of Wrigley Field. That's really not that unusual. But when you looked at what gate they were taking, most pictures are taken of the big score or the big marquee out there at the intersection of Addison and Clark. And that's where most people take pictures. This person was taking a picture of a gate that was on the back side of the stadium that was used for, some people walk through that gate to get into the stands back there, but there's very little commercial environment around there. There's no reason to be there. And there's no really anything special about that gate. So that photograph and that sort of innocuous behavior that looked like every other day at Wrigley Field, we were able to, with help of the police department, identify that person was a very significant person in a counterculture group that was well known to the Chicago Police Department. But without that photograph and without identifying the suspicious nature of why that photo was taken in our camera work, CCTV camera work, using Skyla as a way to identify then future and past contact or presence of that person in Wrigley Field, we were able to unravel a much more complicated fact pattern than we would have just from looking at the photograph of somebody taking a picture of Wrigley Field. So it's not only the tool, it's how you integrate the tool into your security apparatus and you train your personnel to key on these things and to do a little bit of investigation to determine whether or not there's something more to it than that. And this tool is just absolutely critical to that process.
So you can train a security guard, or you can train anyone on your staff then to go out and watch for these threats or watch for abnormal behavior. But that's a single set of eyes, or just you're limited to the number of teams. So if you have hundreds or even thousands of cameras on your solution, by using Skyla to replace that human and watch for that anomaly and bring that to your attention in real time, it sounds like there's definite security advantages to that. And then once you identify that threat, you identify that person as suspicious, then capturing his image and watching for that person in the future is definitely capable. So even without facial recognition and not knowing who our guy is, you can capture that image, and Skyla will remember what that person looks like, just like your brain remembers what somebody looks like, and watch for that person on every single camera live and in real time moving forward. So
and keep in mind, Kris, there's also another application that we probably need to consider here too, is that's sort of the external threat. So that's identifying the external threat, which is obviously present in every organization in America or everywhere in the world looks at an external threat and decides how do they identify and mitigate it before it becomes an issue. But we also applied this same strategy and technology to an insider threat. So by tying our internal cameras to our employee database, we were able to identify and zone out where the sensitive areas were. So think of it as if you're looking at a cyber perspective, your rooms where you have your infrastructure, where you have your servers and your server rooms, those are generally considered very secure areas because you don't want someone to be able to have access to that that's not supposed to have access to that. So in this case, you can tie the people who actually try to gain access to a server room through the cameras, tying that to your existing database that tells you who your employees are. And from that, you can determine whether or not you have an employee that's trying to gain access to an area that they shouldn't have access to. And that allows you to sort of early detect an insider threat. Or maybe it was just a mistake, but either way, that investigative activity that occurs as a result of that this system allows you to key on that. And if you're really good at teaching your system, it can be really good at telling you, what the relevant information is and discarding the stuff that's just normal activity from that isn't. And that's the anomaly, the detection that you're looking for. It's not what goes on every day that's normal. It's what goes on every day that's abnormal. And that's what the system allows you to key on.
So maybe Armen, Jim, you just said an important thing about teaching the system or teaching the AI. So Armen, can you maybe comment on how AI systems, or specifically Skyla, learns, or how it's teaching, or the benefits of the system being able to do that?
Absolutely, Kris, and very inspiring, Jim, to hear about the specific examples, ways this advanced technology is used. In terms of learning, there's a few important considerations algorithmically. One is necessarily the data, and then two, what is being learned. So if we take the specific examples here as per Skyla's offerings in object detection, thermal screening, intrusion detection, perimeter protection, and anomaly detection and behavior recognition, there's a set of actions and motions that are required. So for example, a basic motion detector is going to have all sorts of false positives. Similarly, a very basic analytic on a video stream crossing over a barrier in terms of pixel movement, again, it's going to have a lot of false alerts. So the neural networks have to learn something more meaningful. For example, the difference between a firearm that's holstered and one that is drawn. And so what we have here in terms of neural network architecture is multiplexing. So for example, when you walk into a room and you see a loved one, you'll recognize, for example, the shape of the face. Like at the coarsest level, it'll be a circle. Similarly, when you walk into a room, you see someone familiar, but you don't recognize who they are, you still know they're a person. Now, if we take that processing, that's actually related and overlaps with other objects and entities. So for example, a wheel on a car, and then it's extended processing that two round objects, wheels together, could indicate a vehicle or groups of folks. Even our depth perception has this idea of ratios for the distances. So in Skyla, we have what's mimicked in the human brain, processing from the retina to the intermediate processing center, the lateral geniculate nucleus, projection to the primary visual cortex and the occipital lobe. And so this foundational and really efficient processing allows Skyla to do things quite important. So the circle associated with the barrel of a firearm, the shapes associated with the face, coupled with motion. So behaviors, the drawing of a firearm, the idea of swinging a fix, and bringing these together, these detections that occur over space and time is quite powerful. And these patterns together is what Skyla's queuing on. And it's doing so in an efficient way, in the same way our brains do it, in an efficient way to enable fantastic capability here.
So maybe a quick analogy would be Skyla is similar to maybe a very smart child, where, that child, even though it knows with 99.9% accuracy what things are, objects, weapons, guns, he still can pick up a stick and think it's a gun, right? But you teach that system and you say, no, AI, that is not a gun, that is a stick. And so then you continually correct it. And whenever there's any sort of confusing behavior that the system was not previously trained for, it learns its environment and gets more and more smarter, I guess, for lack of a better term. The longer it's installed, it learns its behavior. So for example, if somebody has a rifle that is disguised as a walking cane, Skyla's going to sit and look at it and say, that's a walking cane. It's not a threat. But if somebody takes that walking cane, they hold it up in a prone shooting position up to their shoulder, then Skyla looks at that and says, well, that's not a cane, but that's a threatening behavior. We're going to trigger an alert anyway and let a human make that ultimate decision and decide whether to act on it or ignore it. And, similar to like a band instrument in a K-12. So the first time somebody takes a violin, holds it up to their shoulder and play it, that looks like a shooting position, but to err on the side of caution, we say that's a threatening behavior. But the first time that we trigger that alert and the human says, no, that's the band room, that's normal for that area, then the system quickly learns, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to say that violin is a threat because that is normal for this behavior. Is that fair example of learning for an AI?
Absolutely, Kris. And if it's a very junior band, the music might be a threat. But beyond that, indeed, the different activities and the different environments will have different protocols. So, for example, near the security operations center or in a precinct, it's quite normal for holstered firearms to be present. Indeed, the context matters. And it's absolutely tremendous, the variety of environments Skyla has been deployed to date.
You talked earlier about Skyla mimicking a human brain or a human. Essentially, the way that your eye sees something, your brain processes it, and then you take action. Well, that essentially is what Skyla does. The camera is the eye, the Skyla is the brain, analyzes that data, and then also determines and sends that alert so that human can ultimately take action. And we do this all in real time. So, literally milliseconds, multiple times per second, we're analyzing multiple frames and watching for those threats. So, and Jim, you talked a little bit earlier about ways that it can be used for access control, for internal. So, Skyla can watch for people that are in areas where they shouldn't be. Maybe it's a sensitive server room or a sensitive area where, in a university where people are developing, research that is very secure area. So is it fair to say that the Skyla could be, every camera turns into a security guard that never blinks, it never sleeps, it never comes in late. It just quietly sits there and watches for that object, action, behavior anomaly, or that person who doesn't belong, or watch for the people that do belong.
That's right, Kris. And I think, going back to the training issue, I used to tell my people at the Cubs, this is like not a child, but a puppy. So, when you want to teach a puppy, the first thing you want to teach it is not to pee on the carpet, right? So you're going to teach it the important things first, and then you're going to work on sitting and laying down and rolling over and fetching. So these are all things where the efficacy of this process and the efficacy of this system is really tied very closely to the people that you have operating it, and they have to teach it. They have to train. It's not an out-of-the-box system. It's not something you're just going to stand up in your command center and it's going to tell you all the important things. You've got to work with it, and it's a process that takes every day to make it better and better and better. And there's so many ways to improve it. We initially had settled on the need for this type of a system. It's amazing how inexpensive this solution is compared to the hardware expense of putting in a CCTV camera system with the limitations that it gives you. This is sort of like not only the cherry on top, but it's actually the ice cream and the toppings as well. With a CCTV camera system, you're getting the bowl. This is the ice cream and all the good stuff. We had a problem at Wrigley Field, believe it or not, where people would climb the outside infrastructure, the steel girders of the stadium infrastructure, and they would climb, entire floor or up 10 or 20 feet, and then they would drop over onto a ramp in the middle of the night. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, these folks were out there, usually some level of intoxication helped them with the desire to do this, but they would climb the outside of the stadium like a monkey, climb onto the ramp, and then they would walk themselves down to the field, and we'd find them out there doing snow angels on home plate in the middle of the winter. And these were, just drunks, right? It wasn't a big deal, but we've had situations in professional stadiums where someone would get the keys to a large piece of equipment and start carving up the field, which then gets really expensive in the middle of the night. So the idea was, when you had individuals sitting there in the security system that might have been answering a phone or dealing with some other issue that weren't paying close attention to the video screens, or if you didn't have the right camera view on the video screen, you might miss that person scaling the exterior of the stadium, walking down the ramp, and then working their way to the field, which was a problem for us. So Scylla we were able to then train our cameras and train our systems to identify an engineer, say, that was supposed to be there at 3 o'clock in the morning, who was walking through the concession area. And when the camera saw him, it would identify him as an employee that had the right to be there. And it wouldn't even send a notification to the Joint Operations Center. It screened all of that out. But when we saw, a fan or someone that was climbing the stadium in the middle of the night that shouldn't have been there, this immediately brought our attention to that and would allow us to mitigate it before that person not only did damage, but could also fall from that elevated position and get injured quite badly or killed from the fall. So we were actually trying to protect our organization from liability issues, as well as from the risk of somebody doing something dangerous or damaging the premises itself. So it was actually a two-fisted purpose. And this technology really allows you to up your game in those areas.
And so do you think it's possible that there's a lot of people that have breached the facility, ran around there for a period of time, and then exited, and were never seen or viewed by security or even the operations center, just because there's so many cameras in such a vast area that they were in there and left and nobody ever knew?
It happened a lot. It happened a lot.
Nothing.
Amazingly, it happened a lot.
So yeah, it's there's a statistic that 99% of all recorded video is never reviewed until something bad happens. Then you go back, you check the video, say, yep, this is the bad guy, this is when it happened, this is where it happened, and by then the damage is done. Versus the proactive approach.
That's the limitation on a nutshell of a traditional CCTV camera approach. You have to have it. It's important, and without that infrastructure, Skyla needs that in order to actually turn this thing into something special. But really, when you see the difference between a traditional CCTV approach and one that's been augmented with Skyla, it's like night and day. The light comes on, and the security professional understands exactly what the value of this thing is. And it can be used in a lot of different ways. You can really cut costs, security costs, as a result of it. You can do all sorts of things. We were using it at the spring training. We were testing it. We didn't actually have the time to use it, but we were testing it because at that time, COVID-19 was a thing. Even in Arizona at the time, everybody had to wear a mask when they were at the stadium. So we were training the system to identify people without masks. So instead of the person with the mask being the anomaly, it was the person without the mask being the anomaly. And then with the system, the notification system that Skyla brings through the application that it comes with, the security personnel in that area could be immediately notified with a picture of the individual that was sitting in the stands and their location without the mask. And then we could quietly go up and ask the person to put the mask on without creating a scene, without doing anything unusual or creating a spectacle. But we were able to use the system for early detection as well as mitigation of the risk.
You talk about the mask detection. We have customers, including like in MLB that one of the face mask detection. And it's funny, the creativity of humans, right? When masks first started, everything was just a blue surgical mask. Then people started getting creative and started drawing images on there, or they started drawing actual faces on there. And Skyla was able to learn and grow and adapt with humans' creativity. And things that may trigger a false detection once, we learn from that is truly a mask and that's a drawing. And so moving forward, some of the creativity that we even saw was complete 100% clear masks. So you could see a person's entire face. And Skyla eventually, we learned that even though that mask was clear, it was still a face mask. So it's been interesting over the course of the pandemic to watch Skyla learn from, all of the creativity that humans bring to the table. So, talking about objects, some of the things that Skyla can identify right out of the box without training with 99.9% accuracy are things like guns and knives. We're so accurate, we can tell the difference between a rifle and a shotgun. PPE equipment, personal protective equipment for industrial, like helmets and safety vests and goggles. We can watch to ensure that employees are wearing that protective equipment, help that organization, not have any, future lawsuits. Another capability that we've already touched on a little bit is intruder detection. You mentioned, if you have hundreds or thousands of cameras over a vast area, the cameras that are just sitting there quietly recording historically, you add the intelligence to them, you add Skyla to the system. Now all of a sudden we're watching for that human. We're ignoring things like spiders, leaves, trees, clouds, anything that does basic pixel. We can talk about this in length, and all the details and what we're capable of, but it truly is a learning. We've tailored AI and taught Skyla to watch for physical security and safety threats. So that brain is out there. It does learn, and we do listen to the feedback. We do listen to what our customers want, what they ask us for, and what they need to make their organizations more safe. So do you guys have any final thoughts? Anastasia, do we have anybody who has any questions?
No, we don't have any questions.
Any final thoughts, Jim? Final thoughts, Armen?
I would say that anybody that's listening in or attending as an attendee, if they're looking at a traditional security approach, which utilizes CCTV, and that could be in the governmental realm as well as in the private sector, you really owe yourself, the benefit of taking a look at this and other products as well. But I think if you do a really solid, due diligence approach to product screening, you'll find out that this product is head and shoulders above all the others, and it's not that expensive. It really isn't, and what it brings to you from a value proposition is incredible. The return on investment is measurable, and it's significant. So I would recommend anybody that's watching to take a deeper dive.
I'll build off of that, as James highlighted and Kris has asked previously. We have now capability, and this is fantastically represented and embodied in Skyla's technology, to find patterns in unstructured data. This has enabled fantastic capability from driverless cars to that of Skyla transforming physical security. And so this being done on the edge, for example, with the Hysteria product offering of Skyla, to that of the cloud computing capabilities in the Skyla business model, the transformation is profound, and it is happening in almost every single industry area, and Skyla leads here in security. It's been a pleasure, a privilege, and this capability is nothing short of as profound as the emergence of electricity 100 years ago. And so we'll have, as you see here with these superb and leading logos, a step jump for these organizations in terms of what can be done. With that, Kris, James, pleasure to be participating with you.
Well, thank you, guys.
I agree. Thanks, Kris.
And with this, we'll conclude the webinar.